Am I the jerk for calling the police after my mom abandoned my siblings at my door?
When I turned 20, I moved out of my parents' house because life there was unbearable.
My name is Alex, and I'm 22 now.
My parents, Steve and Linda, treated everything I owned as if it belonged to them, always prioritized my younger siblings over me, and constantly used me as free labor. Once I moved out, Steve told me not to let the door hit me on my way out. I had been working full-time for nearly 4 years and managed to rent the smallest, cheapest apartment I could find. Within a month, my parents started calling me, begging me to come back because they needed someone to take care of my younger brothers.
I said no. For the first time, I was free and enjoying my independence.
Steve eventually told me that family should come first and tried to guilt me into moving back, even suggesting I pay rent to them if I did. I told him that for once, I was living for myself, and that my happiness mattered too.
His response? Let's see how long you last without us.
I'm not sure what he was expecting, but I managed just fine without them. Over time, we began to mend our relationship, but only because they realized I wasn't going to crawl back to them. Even though my younger siblings were in their late teens, my parents would still occasionally ask me to watch my youngest siblings, trying to offload the responsibility onto me. Whenever I brought up how hypocritical it was for them to avoid parenting their own kids, they gaslighted me, calling me selfish.
After one argument, we didn't talk for months.
Eventually, they came back, this time asking for help again.
One Saturday, Linda showed up at my tiny apartment with my 2 youngest siblings.
She said very little before shoving them inside and leaving. I called her, insisting she come back and pick them up.
She didn't return until after 10 p.m. and acted annoyed that I had interrupted her day. I told her I wouldn't babysit again unless she paid me. I warned her that if she left them at my place without asking, I would call the police and not even open the door. The next morning, I noticed my gaming console was missing. I figured one of my siblings had taken it, so I called Linda. She admitted that they had it but brushed it off, saying she didn't have the heart to take it away from them. I told her it was stolen, and I was coming over immediately to retrieve it. When I arrived, my sibling was crying because the console's battery had died, and they couldn't find the charger. Steve grabbed the console and told me I could have it back if I agreed to help with the kids more often. I wasn't bluffing when I said I'd call the cops. When Steve refused to return it, I started dialing. That's when Linda panicked, took the console from him, and handed it back to me. Steve called her a traitor and tried to grab it again, but I left with my property. Before I walked out the door, I told them that if this happened again, I wouldn't hesitate to call the police. If they wanted a console for the kids, they could buy their own. Steve exploded, shouting that I couldn't disrespect him like that.
I told him I was an adult and deserved respect too, something he'd never given me. He yelled at me to come back and face him as I left, but I didn't look back.
Since then, they've been silent. Linda sent me one text, asking me to babysit my siblings again. She said I was selfish for demanding payment and not acting like family.
I told her that if she wanted me to babysit, she could pay me up front.
I'm not their property.
I have my own life now, and they'll just have to adjust.
It's been over a week since that text, and I haven't heard from them. Honestly, that's perfectly fine with me.
They can handle their own responsibilities. My dad, Michael, was yelling at me again, demanding I man up and take on responsibilities the way he claimed to have done at my age. I told him to stop acting like he controlled me because, technically, I was manning up just for myself and my own life. He had dumped a lot of his responsibilities on me while he worked Saturdays, conveniently avoiding them. I was done with their demands. When Michael's yelling got louder, my mom, Karen, grabbed the phone. I told them both that I was only available to babysit on Sundays, my one day off, and only under specific conditions. I wanted $40, and meals for my siblings had to be prepped in advance.
Feeding them wasn't my responsibility, and I wasn't going to waste my own money on it.
I made it clear I would call the police if anything of mine was taken again, like the time my console was stolen.
To ensure I could prove it was mine, I kept the receipt and wrote down the serial number. Karen lost it.
She started swearing like a sailor who'd just stubbed their toe. I let her vent while ignoring the phone.
After she calmed down a bit, I repeated my terms: Sundays only, $40, and pre-packaged food. If they didn't like it, they could forget about me babysitting altogether. For a moment, there was silence. Then Karen went off again, claiming my siblings, who were now 13 and 16, had been forced to take over my responsibilities because I wasn't around anymore and they needed a break. "Oh, you mean like the breaks you gave me?" I asked, laughing. She tried to justify it by saying it was different since I was the oldest. I shot back that it wasn't different at all. I had lost much of my childhood because they had turned me into a third parent. Now that I was on my own, it was hypocritical of them to expect me to step in again. The two teenagers living with them were more than capable of doing everything I used to do. Karen tried to guilt me, claiming my younger siblings were disobedient and hard to manage. I told her that wasn't my problem and they needed to find another babysitter. Michael got back on the phone and started yelling again, but it was all bluster with no substance. I laughed at him. Karen took the phone back, begging me one last time. I repeated my terms: $50, prepared food, and Sundays only. I also reminded them that I wouldn't hesitate to call the police if they tried to threaten me or steal my belongings again. They began arguing loudly with each other, so I told them to figure it out and call me back when they had an answer. Then I hung up. After that, I didn't hear from them for a few weeks. One Saturday morning, as I was getting ready for work, I heard a loud, frantic knock at my door. It was the kind of knock you'd recognize instantly if you'd heard it 1,000 times before. I knew it was Karen. Moments later, I heard footsteps rushing away and my two youngest siblings arguing just outside my door. I listened carefully. It was clear she had dumped them at my door and taken off. I had a simple plan for this. I'd thought about it after all the advice I got from others when I shared my last story. Without opening the door, I climbed out of my ground-level apartment window, removing the screen, and left. I called my neighbor, a kind older woman who lived a few doors down. She was aware of my situation with my narcissistic parents and immediately called the police. When the cops arrived, I explained that two children had been left in the hallway after their mother knocked on my door and ran off. Let's just say the police took it from there. My parents called me later, furious. Karen was especially upset, screaming at me for causing a scene. I asked her, pretending to be clueless, what she was so upset about. When I asked if she had left my siblings outside my door without making sure I was home, she admitted it. Her justification? She thought I'd be home because it was Saturday. I reminded her that I had repeatedly told her I worked Saturdays now. She started crying, claiming she had no idea, but I cut her off. What she had done was irresponsible, immature, and unacceptable. She started yelling again, saying the police were charging her with child abandonment. I replied, "Well, that's not really my fault, is it?" I told her that if I had been home, I still would have called the police because she had been warned multiple times not to pull something like this. Karen kept shouting nonsense for the rest of the call. In the end, she received a fine and a slap on the wrist. Apparently, she convinced the police that she genuinely thought I was home. My younger sibling later told me that the fine wasn't much, but it still made Karen furious. Michael claimed he didn't know she had left my siblings at my door and was livid when he found out. As funny as it was to see him angry at her for once, I'll give him credit, he had never done something as reckless as abandoning the kids at my place. Karen now has a record, which I see as the first strike in the eyes of the law. Hopefully, it'll make her think twice before pulling something like this again, but I'm not holding my breath. During Thanksgiving dinner, my dad, Marcus, sat puffing a cigarette at the table. He suddenly declared that he was done with the charade and decided to set things straight. With my mom, Diana, seated beside me, Marcus said that the fine Diana had to pay for child abandonment had taken a serious toll on their finances. He told me I needed to move back home to help with the bills, mortgage, and raising my siblings. I didn't budge. Every command he threw at me was met with the same answer: no. Marcus, a big guy, couldn't handle the defiance. His anger boiled over, and he lunged at me. Fortunately, I wasn't helpless. I'd picked up some amateur fighting skills and had been hitting the gym for months. When he charged, I instinctively kicked him square in the groin with my steel-toed boots.
He crumpled to the floor with a loud thud, clutching himself and vomiting from the pain. Before Diana could say anything, I calmly told them that I had proof Marcus attacked me first. I'd been recording audio with my phone, which was in my pocket the entire time.
Marcus, still writhing on the floor, ordered me to leave and never return.
I smirked, grabbed a turkey leg off the table, and walked out. Later, my siblings told me they couldn't stop laughing at the scene. According to them, my dad's injured pride and his poor groin had become the subject of endless jokes in the house. Despite everything, I was invited back for Christmas. I declined and spent the holidays with a friend's family instead. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, I found out why my parents were so desperate to have me return home.
Diana had been pregnant.
I learned this after one of my younger siblings found my Reddit post and showed it to Marcus and Diana. Furious, they stormed into my apartment unannounced and accused me of being a horrible person.
Diana yelled that I had orchestrated her child abandonment fine and ruined her life. I wasn't having it.
I shouted back, listing everything they'd done to me, leaving my siblings on my doorstep, expecting me to sacrifice my life for their convenience, and refusing to take responsibility for their choices. I told them their behavior was terrible parenting and that Diana deserved the fine. It wouldn't have mattered whether I recorded or not. If I'd been home that day, I still would have called the police. Marcus started to clench his fists as if he was going to hit me.
I calmly reminded him that the last time he tried, I left him vomiting on the floor.
I also pointed out that, yes, I was wearing my steel-toed boots again. He visibly winced, muttered something under his breath, and backed off.
Diana, now on crutches from a recent accident, tried to pivot the blame.
She accused me of ruining their family by refusing to help when they needed me most. I learned that she had tripped on their old, rotting porch stairs, falling face-first into gravel. Tragically, she had been about 7 months pregnant and lost the baby after the fall. When I heard this, I was genuinely shocked. I had no idea she'd been pregnant.
Diana had always been slightly awkward and on the heavier side, so it wasn't immediately obvious.
It was heartbreaking to hear about her miscarriage, but she wanted someone to blame, and that someone was me. "You weren't there when we needed you," she yelled. "You abandoned us, and now we've lost everything." I wasn't about to let her pin this on me. I reminded her that I had no control over their decision to have another baby at 45 and that Marcus was too cheap to fix the deteriorating porch, which was the real reason she fell.
Marcus snapped and swung a punch at me. His fist connected, and I saw red. I fought back with everything I had. Thanks to months of training, I was much stronger than before.
I broke his nose, knocked out 2 of his teeth, and left him on the ground with a black eye and a neck brace-worthy injury.
Diana's screaming finally pulled me out of my rage. Realizing things had escalated too far, I stepped back. The police arrived shortly after, and I was handcuffed. Thankfully, my apartment building has CCTV cameras, and I had also been recording video on my phone before the fight started. The footage clearly showed Marcus hitting me first. The police ruled it self-defense, and I avoided charges. But now my parents are threatening to sue me for Marcus's medical bills and the earlier fine Diana had to pay. Marcus can't work right now, which has only made things worse for them. He lost 2 front teeth, has a broken nose, and wears a neck brace. He even had to shave off his beloved beard because of the injuries, something he's especially bitter about. To me, he's no different now than he was before, completely dead to me. The authority my father, Dean, once believed he had over me has completely vanished. Thanks to all the hard work I've put in over the past few months, I'm physically stronger than him, and I'll soon be starting a new job that pays significantly more. If things go as planned, I'll be able to save up and move to a much better place in a few years. A couple of weeks ago, my oldest sibling, Jake, called me. He told me I was his hero for standing up to Dean and giving him the beating of a lifetime during Thanksgiving. Jake said he's planning to leave home soon, just like I did. However, my parents found out about my Reddit posts after my younger sibling, Chloe, overheard someone talking about them on YouTube. Curious, she looked them up and, unfortunately, let it slip to our mother, Linda. Linda made Chloe show her the posts.
According to Chloe, Linda went on a rampage, breaking things around the house in her fury. Both Jake and Chloe have since apologized to me for unintentionally exposing the posts to our parents. They said if they had realized Linda was eavesdropping, they would have never mentioned them. Both of them also admitted they're relieved there won't be another child coming into the picture. They already shoulder a lot of babysitting duties for our parents, which they resent. Initially, they had blamed me for leaving, but now they understand that, as an adult, I have the right to choose my own path. Whether my parents will actually follow through on their threats to sue me remains uncertain, but I'm not too worried. My friend's uncle is a lawyer, and he has offered to defend me pro bono if it comes to that. He's confident they don't have much of a case since everything I did was in self-defense. To my parents, who I know will probably read this, leave me alone. That's all I have to say. My siblings and I are not your property, and when Jake and Chloe turn 19, I'll help them leave, just like I did. You've always been selfish, egotistical people. It's not my fault Linda lost the baby, and it's not my fault your lives fell apart when I stopped being your unpaid babysitter. Think of Dean's smashed nose and missing teeth as a permanent reminder to stay away from me. For the record, I've only shared a fraction of the nonsense I endured growing up. I could tell story after story about my early years, but what would be the point? It wouldn't change anything. So please, don't bother me. P.S. Yes, Linda had to deliver a stillborn baby at the hospital, but I wasn't going to bring it up earlier. According to Jake, my parents held a private funeral, and Linda now keeps a small urn in their bedroom. Jake told me that after they brought the urn home, they went out and got drunk. Apparently, Linda spent 6 days in the hospital recovering from her fall, which gave her multiple bruises and left her needing crutches to get around. Jake mentioned they were acting strangely during the funeral, which made me start doubting the details of the whole situation. Something about their story didn't add up. I decided to go straight to the source for answers. Last Sunday, I visited my parents unannounced. Both of them were at home, sleeping. Linda looked exhausted, hobbling around with crutches and covered in bruises and bandages from her fall. Dean wasn't much better off, still sporting the injuries I gave him during Thanksgiving. When I walked into the house, they looked completely stunned. Dean muttered something about me having a lot of nerve showing up. I ignored him and demanded to know the truth. Had Linda actually been pregnant, or was this just a twisted attempt to manipulate me into coming back? Linda started sobbing and stumbled into the bedroom. She came back with a small urn, which looked surprisingly fancy. She held it out to me and said it contained the baby's ashes. Curious, I inspected the urn. It didn't smell like anything, not even like cigarette or barbecue ashes, which made me suspicious. From what I'd read online, it takes at least 8 to 12 days to receive ashes after a cremation. Linda had been in the hospital for only 6 days, so how did they already have them? When I asked, Linda admitted they bought the urn online while waiting for the ashes to be ready. She said they had just picked them up a few days ago. Afterward, they went out drinking because they were devastated they couldn't bring the baby home. The whole situation felt surreal. I left shortly after, not wanting to dig into it further. Whether their story is entirely true or not, I've decided I don't want to deal with their drama anymore. It's time to focus on my own life and ensure my siblings have a chance to escape when they're old enough. Linda's eyes were filled with tears as she explained what had happened. For once, they didn't seem like the crocodile tears I'd grown so used to seeing from her. She begged the crematorium to expedite the process for the baby's ashes, she said, and they'd agreed to do it faster than usual. I learned more about her fall and the circumstances leading up to it. She was late for an appointment with her OB/GYN after oversleeping during a nap. Rushing to get out the door, she tripped on a toy at the top of the porch stairs. About 3 years ago, the porch railings had rotted and snapped off. Marcus, of course, never repaired them. With nothing to grab onto, Linda fell straight off the porch, hitting the ground belly first. She told me the baby would have been a boy, a fifth sibling to join my 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Linda then admitted that, because of her age and prior injuries, her doctor had advised her not to try for another child. Her body wouldn't be able to handle it. Hearing her say this in person didn't make it any easier, but I had already assumed as much after reading messages from people who commented on my earlier posts. Then I asked her the question I'd been waiting to ask: why did she blame me? She started to say something about how the day they showed up at my apartment had been really, really bad, but Marcus interrupted her. "It's all your fault,
he screamed at me. If you had just come home for Thanksgiving like I told you, none of this would have happened. You should have been there to help. That was it for me. I screamed back that he was the one to blame. If he had bothered to fix the porch years ago, Linda might not have fallen. And even if the porch had been intact, it wouldn't have made a difference. I didn't even know Linda was pregnant. No one had bothered to tell me. Linda didn't take sides. She simply left the room in tears as Marcus and I kept shouting at each other. His face was so red it looked like it might catch fire. Finally, he grabbed his old hunting knife and waved it at me, yelling for me to get out of his house. "You're no son of mine," he shouted. I stopped at the door, turned back, and told him he hadn't been a father to me in years. Before leaving, I told him I'd be filing for a restraining order. I warned him that if he ever tried to harm my siblings the way he had hurt me, he'd lose more than a few teeth. And if he pulled any of the same nonsense with them, I wouldn't hesitate to call the police or CPS. As I walked out, he shouted a string of curses after me, including, "You son of a..." "That's a slight against Mom," I interrupted, just to twist the knife a little more. He exploded in rage again, but I didn't stick around to listen. Instead, I gave him a one-finger salute and rode off on my mountain bike. I don't know what the absolute truth is in all this, and honestly, I'm not sure it even matters anymore. My next steps are clear. I'm filing for a restraining order as soon as possible. Once I start earning money at my new job, I'll be looking to move to a better apartment. After this, I doubt I'll feel like updating again unless my parents do something truly awful to my siblings. For now, I think I'm done. Thinking about all this just leaves me feeling angry and drained. If Marcus sees me as a monster now, so be it. Maybe that's what he needs to believe to stay away from my siblings. If my role is to be the monster that protects them, then I'm okay with that.